Okay. That four-way walkthrough, a lot of times buyers want to try to bring their kids with and check out the house. Honestly, this is not a good time to have kids in the home. It's framed and you're roughed in, but it's still an active construction zone and there's still a lot of risks involved. The stairs are going to be roughed in. There aren't walls there. There's still going to be
It's
equipment.
cutting out.
So if possible, it's best they not bring children. Just have the
Squishy.
adults there, make an adult activity. But like I said, this is where they're going to go through and mark off: is everything where you expected it to be? Everything's in the right spot, and they will sign off on whether or not everything's in the right spot, or if they want changes made.
Is Jackson at school today? Is Jackson at school with the kids? Is he with the kids?
So this is an important one to walk through as well, because you want to make sure everything's in the right spot and is where people are expecting it. At that point, there we go. The four-way walkthrough, typically once we're at that stage, they're going to tell you you're within 45 to 90 days of completion if everything goes according to plan. So again, they're going to see a lot of construction going on, a lot of things happening at the home. The next big deadline that they have to meet is the financing and appraisal. Because an appraisal, even though it's new construction, appraisal still has to be done. And that's ordered when the builder gives you notification that the home is considered substantially complete. That means it's about 95% done. They're doing finish work. And there's usually the deadline for the financing and appraisal is according to the contract, but a lot of times it's tied to that date of being substantially complete, because you can't plan ahead too far in ordering the appraisal, because they got to get the house built. But if you order it too early, the appraiser, I've had an appraiser show up and look around and say, I'm not going to do an appraisal because they haven't got the cabinets hung up in the kitchen. The kitchen's not considered substantially complete. The home's not substantially complete. Call me when the cabinets are in. The cabinets were scheduled to go up the next day. So this is where you work with the builder to make sure the timing is good from sending someone in. Now, at this point, all of a sudden, your buyer's going to feel like now they're getting flooded with a whole bunch of stuff all at once. If it's a quick move in, they're kind of starting in the middle of this. The home may actually be complete enough that by the time they sign the paperwork, they may be actually able to order the appraisal, or it may be fairly soon before, and the building will be completed enough they can order it. They haven't waited months and months and months to get here like a ground up would. But now things really start picking up, because once the appraisal's done and the appraisal report is in, then they're going to get the closing disclosures, just like they would with a existing home. They still have to go out 72 hours prior to closing. They have to be signed and approved by the buyer. This is going to have the final loan amount based on what that final purchase price was, any of the final closing costs, just like a traditional loan. They're creating the final loan. Now, a commonly asked question is, do I have to make a loan payment, a mortgage payment on the house while it's being built? And if it's a production builder like this, the answer is no. They don't have a final mortgage yet. It's not done. If they're building from the ground up with a custom builder and they own a lot and they're paying on a lot, then yes, they could be making a payment. If they're doing a new construction loan with a custom builder, then they may have to be making payments, and there are different steps for that. But with a production builder, a mortgage doesn't exist yet. That's why for many builders, deposits are non-refundable. If the buyer backs out, the builder has used that deposit money in order to purchase the supplies they need or pay their expenses to a certain to a certain point. So it's typically non-refundable. So they're gonna get that closing disclosure. They're going to get a notification of clear to close, that the final loan approval has been completed. Scheduling, now we get into the scheduling settlement with title. Most construction builders, you're going to work with the builder's preferred title company. It's written right into the builder's contracts, typically, that the builder will not provide a buyer's title policy with a split closing where the buyer closed with a different title company. It's also built into many of the contracts that if they close with the buyer's title company and preferred lender, they can receive keys at the time of signing because it's one company handling the transaction. Those are all incentives built into the contract. They're also going to be scheduling through the builder the final walkthrough. This one's commonly referred to as a blue tape walkthrough because everybody gets a strip of blue masking tape that they use when they're masking off areas for painting, and you're going to be looking at the walls to see if there are any blemishes. As paint dries over time, it stretches. And modern architecture with textured walls, sometimes it stretches, just takes a couple of weeks before you start to see spots where the paint didn't set right, or damage, it was painted and then the carpet guys came in and damaged the walls, or any type of work that needs to be completed. I did a blue tape walkthrough. We had to put a big old piece of blue tape on the front window. The glaziers had put in the wrong piece of glass. It didn't match the other windows. So they're the builders having to make arrangements to have that taken care of. They'll go through and check doors, make sure they close, all those kinds of things. It's oftentimes also going to be an orientation to the home and its systems. Some builders will schedule that as a separate signing. They'll have you do the final walkthrough and create a punch list of repairs, and then the morning of settlement, they'll go through and do another orientation and mark off, show you all the repairs that are done and what repairs will still survive closing and will be taken care of after closing. Since they've already scheduled everything else out, they may not be able to get the paint guy in quite yet. At this point, once you get in the and these can all be, these are kind of fluid, they're kind of happening together. After the final walkthrough, or even before the final walkthrough, once it's substantially completed, the buyer has the right to have the home inspected and can pay for their own separate inspection if they choose to. And they can have mold, meth, and radon testing done. Many builders' contracts where the state that in the event that happens, the builder may not be obligated to make those repairs. But if you've got an inspection that shows there are significant construction flaws or construction flaws that need to be taken care of, those can be pointed out at that final walkthrough. And you could be able to then make it a builder obligation to take care of those repairs. And we've had some crazy things show up on those things we've talked about before. You might not be able to see. Oftentimes when insulation is blown in, attic vents get covered. And so the attic's no longer vented properly. We've had the process of insulation and electric being run. We've had the exhaust stacks for water heaters and furnaces knocked loose. And so it's dumping the exhaust into the attic instead of out of a home. Radon. If radon comes up, sometimes if they're going to add a radon mitigation system, it's more easily done before people move in instead of after. It's entirely up to the buyer. And yes, we do recommend, if they're going to pay for it, to do a meth test. We've had meth remediation companies we work with have had to do remediation work on new construction homes, where construction workers were using meth during the day to keep hopped up and energized, and now the home is considered contaminated. So again, it's watching out for your buyer. One of the final pieces of paper that has to be received. CDs, we've got CDs, we've got clear to close, docs are being prepared. One of the final forms that has to be received in order to get the clear to close typically and final documents is the certificate of occupancy. And this is the form that is filed by the local authorities inspector that the home has been inspected and can be occupied. Most builders contract, once that certificate of occupancy is received, put a deadline on settlement based on that date. Many of them it's within 5 to 10 days. If the buyer goes past that deadline, then there's a daily fee that the buyer is going to be paying to try to push them to get it done. If the builder does not provide that a copy of that to the buyer, the builder could be considered in breach. And we have used this in the past when getting the final loan paperwork completed was going to push us past 5 days when the builder said that we've got the certificate of occupancy, or called the C of O. And we said, we don't have a copy. You never sent us a copy. Our 5-day deadline in the contract says it starts when you provided a copy of the certificate of occupancy to the buyer. We don't have a copy, so that time clock hasn't started. And the buyer had to suck it up and was not, because they were threatening about $100 a day in fines. And we looked at them and said, you breached your own contract. This is where being on top of those types of deadlines can help your buyer. The last thing that then comes next, of course, the last day, all that paperwork's done. Settlement's typically scheduled once that certificate of occupancy has been received, because that also keys off finally getting the final loan approval and clear to close. Settlement is done the same way it is any other on any kind of construction or built standing. You meet at the title company. Final documents are signed. And again, there may be some incentivizing by the builder that if a buyer uses the builder's preferred title company and preferred lender, they may actually be handed keys right then and there rather than having to wait for funding and recording. Not all builders will do that. Most often it's going to be once it's funded and recorded, the official transfer of ownership has taken place at the county level, then the buyer can get the keys, either from a sales agent at the sales office or put someplace on the property. If they're getting packed and can't get out there, then you can go out and make arrangements, pick up the key, put it someplace on the property that they can get to, so that that transfer of ownership takes place. And the last step then is move in. Congratulations, they finally own the home. It's theirs, they can move in. We have the moving trucks that can be scheduled through the office. We do ask that the agent be present when the buyer picks up and returns the truck, so that you can make sure that everything, the paperwork's filled out and that there's no damage done to the vehicle. If you're not able to be here, let us know in advance so that Michael knows that Michael's got a heads up. Scheduling the truck goes through Ashley, but Michael has some additional paperwork here. They try to get a copy of the driver license for insurance reasons, for our liability insurance, as well as walk around the truck like you would any other rental vehicle. That's it. Then they get to move in and they have a house. One aspect of this punch list from the final walkthrough is that the punch list will state that some repairs may occur after the change of possession, and it is up to the buyer to make the home available for those repairs to be completed. Now, they're not just going to walk in one day and say, hey, we're here to make these repairs. Typically, they're scheduled so they know what's happening, especially if it's something like a window being replaced or paint being done, where they need to make sure that there's not something obstructing access. New construction homes at that orientation, they'll go through how to put in any kind of warranty claims within the first year of construction. Most builders recommend, instead of as little things happen, unless it's something major like the heat quit working where there's water running all over the floor. Put 2 or 3 requests together all at once and send in one warranty request so that it's easier to schedule it. Most the builders typically will leave cans of paint behind for post move-in touch-up. Walls are going to get bumped. Dings happen. Touch it up. Most builders are going to are going to give them a reminder that new concrete, new driveways, do not put salt on them. The salt will damage the surface of the concrete and cause it to start to break. Landscaping may still be ongoing depending on the terms of the contract. Most areas in the Salt Lake and Utah County, most areas require that the front yard be put in, but the backyard is up to the buyer. So the front yard will be sodded by the builder, everything else up to the buyer. If it's wintertime, what they may actually be, they'll walk through that orientation. They'll have explained to them what will happen for the final landscaping, because it's winter. It's not worth putting grass in, it'll die. So they may be receiving some kind of certificate for the sod, or here's what the anticipated dates are. Fences, that type of stuff that's part of landscaping, they'll go over how to get fencing installed. All those type of things will occur. And if it's in an HOA, at that part of the funding and recording process would be, and I need to, just like any purchase, getting signed up with the HOA. That's a buyer responsibility. Transferring over the utilities is a buyer responsibility. They usually have about 48 hours to do that. And the builder will just say, if you haven't done it, we're shutting them off. We're not, it's got to be in your name. So all of those things will be, those final steps go in as part of that move-in stage. Okay, any questions? You notice that's a lot of steps with a lot of gaps in between them, and then a whole flurry of activity, and then a lot of gaps, and then a whole flurry of activity. There's a lot of activity at the beginning, and there's work being done. There's a lot of activity at the four-way, and there's work being done. There's a lot of activity at the final walk and everything. And then they move in. So it's flurries of activity interspersed with long periods of just being patient. All right, I'm going to end the recording here.